Today I'm going to be reviewing a Batman figure that actually looks like me. Skinny, frightening, and laughing at other people's misery. Okay, in all seriousness, maybe not so much that, but what if the Batman who laughs from the Dark Knight Metal line is pretty much taking it seriously and actually becoming Batman, but in his own style. So basically that gimpish looking Batman with all the spikes and the chains that you've probably seen kind of going around in figure form in the comics, specifically from Dark Knight's Metal. What if he was pretty much taking the mantle of Batman, like I said, in all of its seriousness, but of course with his own visual infected flair? That's pretty much what we ended up here with in Batman from Earth-22 Infected. It's pretty much that style of Jokerized Batman, but this time he's got his own Batsuit to pretty much encompass this brand new figure that we're getting from McFarlane Toys and DC Multiverse. Frankly, I'm genuinely surprised by this figure. I gotta be honest, there's something very, very peculiar about this figure that feels kind of at home with the traditional makings of a McFarlane Toys figure, but at the same time kind of unique, except it's not going too far in that direction. You know what I'm saying? It's a very happy medium. For one, it's also one of the tallest figures that I've seen from this line. I mean, I want to say it's probably straddling the line a little bit of the 7-inch scale. They're traditionally 7 inches, but I feel like this one is just pushing it by a couple of centimeters, and because of that, he is just so lanky that I actually had to bring out the circular disc base to keep him kind of afloat, kind of keeping in line with the tradition of McFarlane figures not exactly being the most sturdy when it comes to positioning or placement or simply just standing up. Unfortunately, it's one of the issues that does somewhat plague the Earth-22 Batman here, is that he had a great amount of difficulty standing just trying to prep for this review that I had to kind of consult to the base here. But once he's actually standing and kind of in a very firm, very display-like kind of pose like this, and he makes an impression. And the color scheme also feels pretty at home with this style of Batman as well. The Batman who laughs, pretty much making his own costume here that's pretty much like this, what I like to call Jolly Rancher blue, with the majority of his costume here pretty much bearing that shade of blue. But it works. It's a very sickly blue, and then he's got kind of like this seemingly glow-in-the-dark green accents with the bat symbol here on his chest, as well as the inside portions of the cape, and little bits of yellow here and there for the utility belt, as well as the straps on his wrist. Overall, it's a very nice-looking color palette that, again, fits this style of character, while at the same time, again, fitting his physique quite comfortably. He's the lankier of the bunch, and because of that, even though he's got just a shade of muscle going on right here in the chest and shoulder and bicep area, he's not meant to be this beefy, stocky Batman. You know what I'm saying? He's meant to be more so of this sickly kind of lank version of Batman, and because of that, it works really well for the character. And the cowl itself is awesome, especially with the Jokerized smile protruding out of the jawline. It just looks completely awesome. And it actually is one of the finer head sculpts that I've seen on the McFarlane thus far. The only thing that I'm a little bit on the fence of is the cape, though I really, really love the texture going on here on the back, because it's kind of modeled after that DC, the DC Future State Batman that had a really nice leathery look to the back side of the cape right here. You even have moments of detail with the tattered and torn areas of the kind of curls going on right here at the bottom, as well as little puncture wounds on the cape itself inside of the middle parts right here. I don't know how I feel about said paint that was utilized on the inside, that, like I said, kind of evokes this feeling that it's meant to be glow in the dark, but unfortunately it doesn't really do that, because yes, I already tested it out. And unfortunately, not only does it not work, but it looks like my guy here was painted and was boxed away while still being a tad bit wet, because a little bit of that paint did manage to stick and graft onto the body of the figure itself, and that is very disappointing. And the only other issue I have with the cape is how it encroaches the shoulders here at the top, like other Batman figures have done in the past, because obviously if you have seen some of my prior reviews, you'll notice that this is probably going to cause a hindrance in the articulation once we get to that point. But before I move on, like I said, apart from that, the overall look of this Batman really grew on me. I wasn't really sure how I was going to feel about this character pretty much just making another Batman figure for McFarlane to produce, but ultimately it warmed up to me as I held him more in hand. further and further and played around with him a little bit more, kind of grew on me and of how, like I said, he's unique while at the same time very familiar, kind of straddles that line right down the middle in a very comfortable way, while at the same time just generating enough uniqueness to him as far as the lankier physique, the makeshift style to his costume, as if the Batman Who Laughs said, you know what, I'm going to be Batman, and I'm going to put the costume myself to fit my personality, from the tattered cape to the very makeshift looking kind of utility belt with the very elongated pockets that are all kind of disproportioned but adequately so, and everything just holds together well. And it's funny because if you want to look at it that way, the articulation kind of fits that bill similarly. You have a very smooth joint on the neckline that's able to have the head rotate 360 degrees without any amount of squeaking or resistance, so that feels very comfortable, but at the same time it's not very loose, and because of that, being able to pivot it upwards like so and then downwards feels really, really good and satisfying. It's actually one of the finer joints I've had on a McFarlane figure in quite some time, so that's very pleasant to see on the Batman Who Laughs as Batman. And inclination from side to side is very smooth and adequate, which probably needs to happen considering that that's the face sculpt that it's utilizing to give us that very creepy tilt, so it works very effectively. Unfortunately, once we get to the shoulders, my fears were pretty much realized, considering the way that the cape encroaches the shoulder, and because of that, you're not going to be able to do the full 360 degree rotation vertically, but the shoulders are able to lift about yay far if you want to look at it that way, so it's pretty much able to extend upwards only about that far, but I would say that's pretty flexible enough. It doesn't necessarily have to do the full 360. Would have been nice, but as we are left with this amount of movement, I can't complain too much. And plus, the cape itself is also a little bit more on the flexible side. I would say that there's been some other McFarlanes that have had much more rigid capes that were a bit more restrictive than even this one is, so I should be thankful for at least that. Extension is also very generous with a slightly, I guess you could call it semi or ratcheted joint here on the horizontal plane, so you're able to pretty much extend the arms off to the side about that far like so. And then you do have a pretty substantial butterfly joint on the inside. I'm trying to fit him in camera here. That's actually how tall he is, that I actually have to kind of bend him over to the side in order to be able to demonstrate this properly. But if you look a little closely, he is able to give some proper shrugging motion and full rotation on the inside of the joint via that butterfly joint, so it is still predominant right there. There are bicep swivels on both arms, however they are a little bit on the tighter side than I was expecting, but thankfully I'll gladly take that if it means that they're not sculpted the same way that the Endless Winter Batmans were, because for a split second I was kind of afraid that that's exactly how they were molded. You can kind of see that angle right there, but thankfully they were made in a size proportion that actually fits the rest of the shoulder, unlike that other Batman, so at least I'm thankful for that as well. And then you do get two joints at the elbows that are fully able to bend all the way upwards like so. Again, one of them didn't look like it was moving, but once I gave them the full push, they were both able to bend adequately right there on the two joints. And then much like with other Batman, you're of course going to have a very nice and smooth wrist joint that's able to allow the hand to fully rotate 360 degrees, as well as vertically move upwards and downwards very fluidly. Now the torso joint is actually a little bit interesting because even though there's not a whole lot of crunch on the inwards part going on, as you kind of see right there, he can kind of slightly do it a little bit there. It's once we get to extension towards the back that it actually bends backwards rather well, not only due to the mid-torso joint, as you can blatantly see the cut right across right there in the middle of the torso, but even the waist is able to extend a little bit there. Now, because of the movement in the waist, I thought to myself, okay, then that can only mean one thing. I am able to fully rotate, I believe 360 degrees on that mid-torso cut via what feels like that joint that I really like, that a lot of McFarlanes are being able to use these days. But if that waist is able to extend, surely it should be, yep, look at that. It's able to actually move from left to right on the waist joint. So you actually get some increased mobility on the mid-torso thanks to not one, but also two joints right across right there. So that is very awesome to see for a figure such as this. And then you do have the two top leg joints that are able to have the leg move forwards only about that far. It does start to kind of wane in a little bit on the utility belt because of those, again, disproportionate pockets that he has here on the side of the utility belt. They kind of perform a little bit of a resistance on the top leg joints, so do be careful with that. But you are also able to extend them towards the back about that far. Unfortunately, when it comes to that extension is when this utility belt becomes a bit of a curse once more, because extension can only take you about that far to the sides due to the utility belt. But even outside of that, it just feels like the joint just kind of stops right about right there. So that's pretty much the amount of mobility you're left with. And then of course you do get the two proverbial joints here at the knees that are able to allow the knees to fully bend all the way up. A little bit of resistance when I'm pressing upwards like so, but they are still, however, both doable to be able to move that far up like so. Call me crazy, but I think I would have liked to have had some kind of boot cut right here, only because it did look like the boot was somewhat separated from the main body here, but unfortunately no movement of that sort is found. So it would have been nice to have had that as a nice change of pace for McFarlane's, but it is what it is. So moving on downwards, you get the traditional ankle ball joint that's able to allow the foot to rotate vertically, horizontally 360 degrees, as well as being able to ratchetedly move downwards like so and upwards like about that. And you do get some pointed toes that are able to articulate upwards like so. So despite a few qualms, and again the lengthiness of the figure itself making it just a little bit on the difficult side to pose and get standing, as you see me here kind of fidget with the base so I can get him back into a standing position, I would say this is still a very pleasant figure that was pretty much scratching every itch that I wanted out of a unique McFarlane. So it's a bit of a bummer that he comes up a little short on the accessory side. It's almost like becoming a trend with an awful lot of recently released McFarlane figures. That begs the question, okay, what is McFarlane really thinking about over there when it comes to the R&D of the accessories? Because the -22 Earth Batman here comes with quite literally the most what the fuck kind of accessory here, and that is a batarang. That is it. Not only is it the singular only point of accessory that he's got coming with, but it's also one of the ugliest. You mean to tell me this is meant to be a batarang? Look how garish this is. Not only is this coated in that similar glow-in-the-dark like green paint that doesn't glow in the dark, which would have been nice. It would have been a nice, like I said, change of pace for features embedded within a McFarlane toy figure, but also look how huge and massive this thing is. Batarangs are supposed to be small so they could be malleable and throwable, and yet this thing, I guess this kind of speaks to the personality of the Batman who laughs. He's meant to make everything be huge and very overdramatic and showy, and because of that, the Batarang is supposed to reflect that. And frankly, I do kind of like the actual design of the bat symbol within it itself. It's just that when putting it in his only functionable hand that's able to hold said Batarang, which is the gripping one on his right, look at this. Look at this. This just looks, it just looks kind of ridiculous. And it also brought up an interesting point, something that I thought of myself, and it kept looking at it and going, you know what? What probably would have been better? An extra pair of hands, because as you'll see, he has only one hand that's modeled to actually hold the Batarang. The other one has these claws on it, and he's got like this very expressive mwahaha kind of thing going on with that hand. It would have been awesome to have gotten a second pair of hands that would have been one full set of these clawed open hands, like with that very intimidating look, and then another pair of holding hands. That way you're able to swap the Batarang from hand to hand depending on the poses, and then you would have had great intimidating clawed hands, something, kind of akin to the Batman Beyond McFarlane that we ended up with a little while back that I even covered on this channel. That would have been fitting for a McFarlane such as this, because everything else that this figure was setting out for, as far as the very smooth, somewhat familiar but still very well placed points of articulation that felt smooth, the joints pretty much were almost a 10 out of 10 right out of the box. Nothing was stiff, nothing needed to be thawed away with a hot gun or boiling water or anything like that. It just worked right out of the box. But beyond that, the sculpting and the detail, like I said, though a little bit on the familiar side, was able to be different enough to make this one of the more unique McFarlanes to come out in some time. It is just shy of being damn near perfect if it wasn't for maybe being a bit more lax on the accessories, which is becoming a very reoccurring trend with McFarlane toy figures. And eventually something is bound to give with that. Nevertheless, I am thoroughly relieved that I don't feel any kind of motivation or inkling to want to return him. Especially because I got him from a place that I don't think they can do returns after you open up the box. But at least I'm very relieved to be thoroughly satisfied with this figure despite its misgivings. And if you guys want to pick up your own, be sure to utilize the links in the description below to help with the channel an awful lot. If you guys want to show your support for the channel in other ways, of course you could always hit the thumbs up button on this video. Check out this other McFarlane toy review showing up on screen. Subscribe for others coming out in the future. And of course, as always, stay humble. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.